Bitcoin on Wednesday hit a new all-time high of more than 66,000
Now
US
it's starting
dollars.
to actually gain some
If
traction.
you're stupid enough to buy it, you'll pay the price for it one day.
It has quintupled in value over the last year.
Elon Musk makes one of his riskiest bets ever.
Money is just a number in a database.
We're talking about a decentralized
world. The supply of dollars can never be sufficient to satisfy the debts that it creates.
The Turkish Lira crashes with 20% inflation. Morgan Stanley increases their Bitcoin holdings, and both Michael Saylor and El Salvador buy the dip. Welcome to All Time High, a crypto podcast. I'm your host, David Vader, and my co-host, Swerty. How are you today, mate?
Great, always good to be here, and looking forward to some of the stuff we've got to chat about, actually.
Absolutely. We talk every time about how, it seems like a slow news week until we get to recording this and we see all the news that's happened over the last week. Big things again. Of course, the price has been retracting, and Michael Saylor has gone ahead and bought the dip, adding another 7,000 Bitcoins to MicroStrategy's stash, which is very exciting.
$414 million. It's just put bang straight in.
Absolutely. Fantastic. He bought it at an average price of 60 grand, which lends some stability to this price point. You know what I mean? It really makes me think, well, a tech pioneer like Michael Saylor is not going to be having his company buy Bitcoin if it's overpriced. This is underpriced. He sees a bargain here.
That's it. And he's been cost averaging almost. Like if you look at the overall prices that they've been buying at, it's averaged at about 29,000 per Bitcoin, well, 29,534 per Bitcoin. And it's really good to see Bitcoin stabilizing in this kind of, I'll say around 60,000, give or take, but a bit below. But it's really showing the resilience of people who are holding. And as we talked about last week, there's fewer Bitcoins on exchanges at the moment for purchase. So at the moment, I think a lot of these billionaires and these investors are buying up big. And talking of buying the dip, we've got El Salvador again has bought another 100 Bitcoins. It's not quite as much as 7,000 Bitcoins, 5.4 million.
Yeah.
But Bukele's he's on the ball with this, at least
he's on the ball.
Whomever's advising him.
Look, but I think, Nayib Bukele is a smart guy. He knows this strategy works. He knows not only is the Bitcoin the future, but he knows that this particular strategy of dollar cost averaging your way into this asset is the best way to go. I frequently have friends hitting me up saying, hey, how do I get into Bitcoin? Maybe because they know that I'm in the space. And I always tell them, look, don't buy all at once. Don't try and time the perfect time to get into the market. Separate the amount that you've got allocated to Bitcoin. Let's say you got $10,000 or something, and buy yourself, $500 every couple of weeks, and get into the space that way. Because then you're getting the average price, and you're not a casualty to the ebbs and flows and the volatility of the asset. Getting back to what you said, El Salvador buying the dip. Both of these guys are pioneers. They know what they're doing. You know what I mean?
Yeah, they're trusting what they're doing as well. They're showing confidence, and there's an inevitable risk anytime that you lead out the front on either a new technology or whatever kind of social movement.
Yep.
Bukele is showing some strong resilience here, and it's the confidence I love the most about this. It's like, we bought the dip again. And even the meme style, he releases the information on Twitter. That all shows a real confidence in Bitcoin, and assume that some intelligent people advising him on when to buy, how much to buy, watching the market. These people have access. If you're buying millions and millions of dollars of Bitcoin, you have access to extremely good technology which can follow these prices and these stock to flow ratios. They're doing research. This wouldn't be just willy-nilly like Bukele's sitting there on his phone looking up Bitcoin when it dips.
Although that does sound pretty funny.
I would hope that that's actually how it happens. He's just on the toilet.
Do. Whoops, another 100 Bitcoins. But, to your point, though, it's not a flippant decision. These people know the technology. They know that this is the future, and they know that Bitcoin is the asset, the currency that is resistant to this Fed printing that we're seeing. And of course, with the recent news of this new strain of the virus, there's been a bit of panic, and of course, that's going to mean more printing. The money printing is not going to stop, and these guys see how Bitcoin is the way out of that. You know, it's rare you see pioneers in today's day and age, but even rarer was when Bitcoin was quite younger. We had Edward Snowden, come out this week, and basically he said, "Look, 10 years ago, when I dropped all this NSA stuff, I paid for those servers using Bitcoin." So he was already thinking about the anonymity and the privacy that Bitcoin provides.
Yeah, the functionality of it in what he was trying to do was perfect.
I love it.
It's got to hurt to some extent. I think 10 years ago, that's depending how much you paid, that's potentially a large amount of money. But as we talk about the 10,000 Bitcoin used to buy a pizza or whatever, these early pioneers are the ones who helped pave the way, and in a way, their sacrifice is more important than the money that they've lost.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, yes, he had to pay, and that money would be probably worth a lot more than what he used to pay for the servers at that time. But the benefit that he got from those servers being not paid through MasterCard or some trackable and verifiable system where his identity would have been revealed, so very, very forward thinking, very smart man.
Talking of forward-thinking pioneers, Facebook, obviously, Meta now spending billions buying up the metaverse, and be that, a lot of, you've got the land plots that a lot of these, like Decentraland are offering. There was one that went for, I can't remember, it was like 2.3 million or 2.8 million or something recently, just for a plot of land.
Wow.
These early adopters, and specifically, of course, Meta has a huge interest in wanting to push this because they're trying to centralize themselves in the middle of this new metaverse world that's starting to come out. But when it comes to the functionality of these land plots, I see this not so much as for individual consumers. I mean, you'll get rich investors, but it's not really for you and I yet. This is kind of going down the pathway where the larger companies, conglomerates, or whomever are buying up land plots for advertising and to start building a structure, a system that then when you have a large number of people kind of migrating over into the metaverse, there'll already be a structure for them to engage with and be a part of. And then that's when you'll see functional trading. So a lot of these crypto coins, kind of like Sandbox and Mana, it's hard to know where they're at. We're seeing all-time highs, but we're also seeing 20, 30% movements in a day. And there's a lot of questions as to, where are these things going? How are they going to be used? Are they functional? And there's a lot of ifs and unknowns. But again, early movers tend to be rewarded the best when they make decisions. And it's hard to know, again, like what the right decision is. But just simply by being there, being one of the first people a part of this, you can really benefit from that.
Yeah, absolutely, man. A good rant. Thank you. And Zuckerberg knows what he's doing. You know what I mean? This is partly I see this action by Meta and Zuckerberg as one operating out of fear of missing out, because I think he sees the way things are going. He's very forward thinking. He understands how the future is heading, what direction it's heading in rather. And I think he sees that as a threat to his business model, and he knows, look, I got to buy up. I got to get this whole system locked in so that I can be a part of the future, because otherwise he'll be left behind with a variety of other tech companies that aren't paying attention to this space. The metaverse, it's a bit of I don't know, it's almost a term that's become a bit of a parody of itself. Lots of people throwing it around, not understanding what it means. But really, if you look into what the metaverse is, it is Bitcoin in 2013.
It is still a wild west, and it's not really defined yet. And this is why I think you've got large early adopters like taking a claim.
And sure, there's financial opportunity there, absolutely. But the whole shift of the way humans are going to be operating in the world, that's really what you're going to be paying attention to. Speaking of forward thinking, Europe kind of came out one of the Swedish regulators came out, actually. I shouldn't put Europe into this whole bucket because it's not all of Europe. One of the Swedish regulators came out this week and said they got to ban Bitcoin mining because otherwise they're not going to hit their climate goals. And look, no matter what you think about the issues with the climate and Bitcoin mining it's not contributing in the way that a lot of people think it is. That said, of course, there's always going to be people that are on the other side of this, and they're going to be saying, we need to ban Bitcoin mining, or we need to, stop Bitcoin from becoming this network and store of value for the world. These people aren't forward thinking. These people are the opposite of that.
Yeah, one of the issues is obviously Bitcoin cops a fair bit of flack for not being environmentally friendly. We saw Musk earlier last year rescind on his offer that Tesla will accept Bitcoins because it's not environmentally friendly. A lot of European countries are very much advocates for renewable energy, being aware of climate change. They're pushing to make sure that these summits that we hold around the world, that people are held accountable for their choices and their actions. But I'm not convinced that Bitcoin is the issue at play here. I mean, looking at a lot of the Nordic countries, they have huge mining operations. There's large ocean operations with fishing trawlers and a lot of cruise ships and ocean liners where they're taking cruise ships, oil tankers, taking vast amounts of oil across the world. You can always look at a problem and say, well, we have to stop this because of X, Y, Z. I think one of the fundamental things with Bitcoin is we have to embrace it as a change for future economies if it's going to work all around the world. And those that find excuses to ban it rather than work with it are going to be left behind.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I heard this great podcast this week from Raoul Pal.
Raoul Pal.
Yeah, he was interviewed by Breedlove. It's a great podcast. I'll be sure to chuck it in the description, actually, because I definitely recommend what listeners of this podcast have a listen to that too. It basically goes into depth about a variety of things, but one of the things he talks about is The Sovereign Individual. It's a great book published in like 1997. And it talks about how when huge change occurs, it is rarely felt by everyone at the same time. It's usually when a huge change occurs, it's only, decades after the fact that people see what a huge change it was. I'm thinking even of the internet in the late 90s, early 2000s. Yeah, there was always some people that were saying this is going to change the world, but not everyone was thinking it. But of course, in 2021, looking back at that time, we can see that was when the shift occurred. And that's exactly what's happening here. Going back to what you were saying about Bitcoin mining operations, they're all over the world, and they're securing this network that is very, very important for the world. And sure, we got to use some energy to do that, but really, it's doing a lot more for the benefit of the world and for energy, actually, than it's using.
Yeah, and eventually we'll find better ways to produce energy. I don't think that this is like a red herring argument for what's happening around the world with energy uses and consumption. Saying, Bitcoin uses so much energy. It's like, look, there are numerous worldwide industries which use factors of magnitudes larger of energy bigger than what Bitcoin does every day.
Yeah, exactly.
And they don't offer anything for the future. Like coal mining, gas, they kind of allow a transition point, but they are stalling on really the world needs to radically shift towards a more effective production of energy we all understand that carbon is not good for the atmosphere at the moment with the way climate change is working. If we can find a better way to make energy, a far more efficient, more powerful way, maybe it's these fusion reactors they're talking about, maybe it's renewables, whatever, then it doesn't become an issue. But they've made this into like a side issue to take away focus from the core problem, where some of the biggest emitters of pollution in the world are really just run away with these problems.
That's right, and it's a quick talking point as well. It's way to score some points in Parliament, or in this case, in European Parliament. It's like let's point the finger at Bitcoin and say, if we solve that, then this energy crisis, this climate crisis is magically going to go away. And that, of course, is not going to happen. Okay. Bitcoin is doing more for the environment, it's doing more for the energy sector than it's taking away. That's the bottom line.
And it's similar to what they talk about in the Bitcoin standard, where, like, you know, don't underestimate how much energy and time and human energy it takes to actually make and print fiat currency. There's huge layers of operations that go on here that
and gold and other commodities. Come on, what are you doing?
So the storage of that sort of stuff, this is not a simple argument, but also it's really a falsehood to just claim that Bitcoin is worse inherently because it uses a large amount of electricity. The IMF has had, functionally the IMF was set up to almost be like that middle bank which allows for transactions between countries all around the world to kind of fix the problems that we've got with interest rates. And they've served as a middleman to try and, I guess, keep some sort of balance amongst all of these countries. They've recently been slamming El Salvador because in El Salvador's the denominated bonds have crashed, and I mean that was on Monday. They've hit an all-time.
That's right. The dollar bonds just went down because of the Bitcoin-backed bonds.
And this is an interesting situation to be in. El Salvador, functionally with actual cash without a bailout, I don't see any way that they can possibly repay these bonds, which are due in was it 2050? Basically, what's going to happen is the price of Bitcoin goes up. I would imagine they'll be transferring that to fiat standard to allow that repayment of those bonds. Or they may not. I don't know what their plan is.
I mean, it's the same. But you think about it. This is the same strategy that Saylor took with MicroStrategy. Basically, borrowed a whole bunch of fiat money and bought Bitcoin with it. And he told his stockholders that he was going to do this. So they had the opportunity to opt out. And El Salvador is doing the same thing. It's saying, hey, you can go short on the dollar. And that, to me, is the right play. Short on the dollar, long on Bitcoin. That's exactly what's happening. And we see it happening with dollar bonds crashing and the Bitcoin bonds going up, these volcano bonds. We covered this in last week's news. Very fascinating what El Salvador is doing.
Yeah, and functionally, when the IMF sort of instated itself to kind of be this like reserve bank that helps control interest rates and issues around the world, and then slowly the US dollar morphed to become kind of the world's reserve currency. What we started seeing is when countries default on their bonds, or maybe whether it's European or if it's US, eventually it comes back to being an issue between them and the US. It's always kind of valued with US dollars. And what we've seen, though, is the US dollar, the buying power and inflation recently, but also more, over the last 100 years, its buying power has collapsed. Whereas Bitcoin's has effectively become the inverse. It's risen dramatically against it, almost to an exponential level. Or the Turkish Lira has crashed. It's a historic low recently. Massive sell-off, and some people have been demanding that they too become backed by Bitcoin.
Yeah, of course. This presents an opportunity for the Bitcoin community, and we, of course, are evangelizing Bitcoin. And we see a currency in strife like the Turkish Lira. Yeah, we see a currency in strife like this, and we're like, look, you could solve this with Bitcoin. Look at what El Salvador is doing. No more issues with inflation. But I think the reality is, of course, that's not going to happen. Who knows? It could. And I hope I'm proved wrong, but I don't think President Erdogan is going to start buying up Bitcoin. I think what's more likely is a bailout from some other country and maybe a currency switch. But yeah, the lira crashing, inflation 20%. And, my guess is that it won't be too many years before we see the same sort of thing happening in what we now deem as safer currencies. I think that sort of inflation will pick up everywhere, Yeah, moving on. We had Morgan Stanley this week, of course, huge US bank conglomerate, increased its exposure to Bitcoin, increased its holdings of Grayscale Bitcoin Trust. So now it's got exposure 300 million to Bitcoin. This is amazing. I mean, I think Morgan Stanley, along with a variety of other companies, kind of understand that it is riskier to not hold Bitcoin than it is to hold Bitcoin now. And this is a perfect example of that.
It's interesting to see Morgan Stanley throughout the years sort of flippantly going back and forth between pro-Bitcoin or Bitcoin's just never going to work, and Morgan Stanley have a lot of people that work for them, and that name is quite synonymous with news articles. If it's Morgan Stanley back, then it's going to get published online. Or the Grayscale shares, again, it's a nice polite way, almost like it's an easy way for Morgan Stanley to expose himself to Bitcoin indirectly by not scaring investors or other people. This is really smart. The money that they're going to make on this is going to be huge. And I'm sure they've probably got exposure in other ways that they're not telling, but Morgan Stanley has very complicated systems that they love to use. And, these sort of portfolios that they hold are no exception to that.
Yeah, absolutely, man. It's, I like what you pointed out there. It's like, this is the stuff that we're seeing in the news, but on the back end, these companies are getting exposure in other ways. They only reveal little drips of their strategy. Of course, if they went public with their whole strategy, people could outplay them. So that's not what they're doing. But on the back end, they're getting more exposure.
That's it. And just this week, we had the Australian pension fund Rest Super discussing plans to invest in crypto, a $40 billion pension fund. And when it comes to pension funds...
how many billion did you say, sorry?
40.
40.
So the Australians are traditionally conservative, specifically older Australians who are reaching retirement age, boomer generation. They're conservative, and this is not something that many of them would go out of their way to want to invest in, because it's simply not something that they've grown up with or necessarily have the time and energy to want to learn about, especially where it's still so very volatile. The CIO of the company has mentioned these issues, but they too can see that it's far easier to go with Bitcoin than to ignore it or fight against it. And
yes, but the millennials are taking over, man. The boomers are done. The millennials are taking over. Australians, although we do have a large boomer population, I just want to point out that we do have one of the most highly educated populations when it comes to cryptocurrencies. I think just under Holland was like the top country ever, the highest percentage of the population that owns cryptocurrencies. And Australia was something very close to either second or third. So, yeah. Well,
it's surprising that so few of my friends know anything about it or don't hold any. Like, I can still see that. I feel like, I don't know the numbers on it, but I feel like 1 in 5 people I talk about kind of goes, oh, I have a bit, or I know a bit about it. And that still seems so early. It's so few people holding it or understanding it. It's not like we trade it or use it at all. So this early adoption is still very much taking place. And Australian is part of that. But with that kind of exposure that super funds are going to start moving towards, I've used one with Raise where they offer 5% exposure, I think it is, to Bitcoin on one of their islands. You have to pay a little bit more. Every time that you spend a bit of money, you can put a little bit, rounds that dollar figure up into an online investment portfolio, which becomes super if you wish. And you can expose yourself to Bitcoin.
There is one, actually, you can do that with cryptocurrency as well, but it's not currently available in Australia. So hopefully that does become available soon. I mean, just for people that aren't Australian, don't know how super works, it's essentially a forced retirement savings plan, a forced 401k. I think they have. About close to 10% of your annual salary automatically gets put into this fund, and then you can't touch it until you're 65. They'll probably raise that age as the population ages, but you do have choices that you can make around how you invest that money. So while technically you can't access it to go and buy yourself a Porsche, you can choose where you're allocating that investment. And as Rest enables, Rest is the name of this super fund, as they enable Australians to invest in cryptocurrency, it's not a giant fund necessarily that is making the choice there. They're passing that choice on to the end consumer. And my guess is if they allow Australians to invest in cryptocurrency baskets within their fund, they're going to be attracting a lot more than 40 billion assets under management. A lot of Australians are going to be rushing to Rest because they're going to be getting the best returns. And it's as simple as that. And that's why this whole race works so well for Bitcoin. It's because, sure, one or two funds start investing, but the next year, they're the ones that have performed the best. And so more companies have to jump in. And this accelerates the return of Bitcoin, of course, as more money floods into the system. We have
a $40 billion fund isn't particularly large in an Australian term, but it's actually not even a drop in the ocean compared to some of the size of the asset managements. When you're talking about BlackRock is, what was it, like $15 trillion or $9 trillion they overlook, and we've got large places which are holding billions and billions and millions of dollars regularly. Yep. So when we start exposing Australians to this, there's going to be small movers to start with, but over time that grows, and of course we're going to see the price of Bitcoin go up, and more people will trust that they'll have that fear.
That's right. You got to remember, torrential rain starts with a few drops, and I'd say 40 billion is probably a lot more than a few drops. We had
I'd like 40 billion.
Yeah. We had Mexican billionaire Ricardo Salinas Pliego has advised all his investors to put their money in Bitcoin. He basically went out this week and said, look, I'm a billionaire, respect me, and everyone should buy Bitcoin now. He literally said those words, buy Bitcoin right now. Again, we get back to this topic of forward thinkers. Who is thinking for the future and who is thinking for the past? And there's a lot of people that are still going to go and make money with oil or with gold or with printing money, however else the old hat did it. But more and more people are going to be making money through crypto and Bitcoin. Yeah, and
it's a really exciting area because we see such large explosions of price. You're talking like hundreds of %. Some of these shitty altcoins, but where there's smoke, there's fire. It's not always a true analogy, but I think it's quite a poignant one, especially when it comes to billionaires or people who have been investing and money centric their whole life, investment centric. Pliego is one of the richest people in the world, and one of the richest in Mexico, and he's obviously quite bullish on this, and then regularly talks about this sort of stuff, talking about the fake printing of money. One of the issues, obviously, with which causes inflation, hyperinflation, and recently we've been seeing the Fed printing huge amounts of money, saying this is going to fix the problem, and he's turning around laughing, going, "No, it's not." and this is a hedge against inflation, effectively. So you'll know this. When you talk to someone who's been in money and assets for 40 years, it doesn't mean this one particular individual is going to be right, and you should, basically follow them blindly with their advice. If you're going to listen to someone, listen to an expert, forming your own opinions on it.
And if you can't trust one expert, listen to a whole bunch of them. Because the wisdom of crowds idea does play out here. You don't just have one billionaire investing in Bitcoin. We have billionaires all over the globe saying essentially the same thing. Hey, look, I'm putting my money, and it's actions that speak louder than words as well. Sometimes they're not coming out and saying buy Bitcoin right now, but maybe they're actually allocating a portion of their portfolio to cryptocurrencies and Bitcoin. I mean, yeah. Look, what else can we say? Obviously, you do your due diligence, but if you're going to be following the smart money and looking where the smart money is going, it's going into Bitcoin.
That's it, man. Follow where the rich are putting their money. Follow where the investment companies are putting their money. And I think you would be on a good path.
I think that's probably a good point to leave it. Thanks to all our listeners for tuning in to another episode of the All Time High podcast. Don't forget, subscribe on YouTube. We're releasing these every single Wednesday. They're coming out, or subscribe on your favorite listening app. Thanks again, Swerty, for joining, and I'm out.
Thanks for having me.